You know, Benjamin Franklin once said, "Beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy." What is it about beer that we love so much? And just what goes into good beer that makes us want to thank the heavens? Come along as I make it my quest to learn about the history, the chemistry, and the passion for great beer. You'll meet others who search for beer excellence and find out what drives their search for that perfect pint, stein, or pilsner. And finally, we get to enjoy the fruits of our labor as we say cheers to great beer, right here on The Brew. First, I wanted to learn a little Milwaukee brewing history. The old Pabst Brewery is no longer in service, but historic tours are still given at the site, starting at the Best Place, named after its founder, Jacob Best.
And you are at the best place at the historic Pabst Brewery, if you didn't know that already. And we call it that for a couple reasons, foremost being because it is the best place at the historic Pabst Brewery. Could there be a better place than this?
James C. Wardle takes us through the history of Pabst in the historic Blue Ribbon Hall. This beautiful room was surrounded by a fresco showing the history of the Pabst Brewery. Jacob Best founded the Best Brewery in 1844. The B emblem can still be found on every Pabst Blue Ribbon. Jacob's son Philip took over the Best Brewing Company in 1850. Philip's daughter fell in love with and married Captain Frederick Pabst, who became vice president in 1864. In 1889, the name was officially changed to the Pabst Brewing Company. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 eliminated the competition to the south, and by 1882, the Pabst Brewing Company was one of the biggest in the world. Pabst beer won a gold medal at the 1893 World's Fair, but contrary to popular belief, it never won a blue ribbon. Blue silk ribbons were attached to the bottles as a promotional tool, and soon consumers were saying, "Give me a blue ribbon." Captain Frederick Pabst died in 1904. His statue still watches over the courtyard of the Best Place. Seeing his somber gaze, I have to think being a beer baron was an honorable trade. In 1920, the U.S. prohibited the sale of alcohol, but Pabst marketed their Blue Ribbon malt extract as a health tonic, with a warning that said users might accidentally make their own beer if they weren't careful. By 1933, Prohibition was repealed, and it was good times once more.
Clearly delicious. That's Pabst Blue Ribbon. Over 100 million barrels since 1844.
Sadly, in 1996, Pabst was bought out and its historic brewery was closed. The tours of today show a piece of Milwaukee history. A history that lives on at the Best Place. For my next stop, I wanted to see how the big guys roll. Miller Coors is one of the biggest beer makers in the world.
Huge company, but a big company that provides small brands and large brands. So we cover a wide gamut of offerings from some of the more innovative craft beers that we brew to some of the delicious mainstream premium light beers like Miller Lite and Coors Light. So in general, I would say that we produce over 65 million barrels of beer a year across a large brewing network.
So how does someone get into the brewing business?
First of all, it starts with a passion for beer. So assuming that you've met that first criteria, then I would say that the next criteria that you need is a thirst. And a thirst for learning is a piece certainly of what we're about. But ultimately, You can find your way into the brewing industry on a number of different paths, but if we're talking about the brewing side of the business, whether you're a home brewer or you choose to get some professional education, maybe work with a small brewer, or alternatively pursuing a brewing degree, which could take you directly into our process.
How do they come up with all those different beers?
I think you can look back over a long portfolio, and to your point, over the years, we've played with amber ales, we've played with stouts, we've played with IPAs. A lot of the traditional styles that you'd be familiar with. Certainly things like pilsners and more robust pilsners, like a European pilsner, for example. But even to the extreme of working with some other microflora to create things like lambics. We have a delicious lambic creek that we've made that we really haven't released to the public. We make it for ourselves. We call it Old Wisconsin Red. Really crimson, dark, ruby color. Delicious flavors, a bit of a sour note like you'd expect from a lambic, but also even to the other side of that of making a barley wine and holding that and aging it over 2 or 3 years, sort of the traditional process of barley wine. I like to think of it this way, as craftsmen, as brewers, what we have is a palette to work with, much like an artist has. And that palette in our case consists of things like different barley malts, roasted barley malts, different sorts of pale malts, Munich, Bonlander, and so forth. Things that add distinctly different character to the beer, whether it's caramel that's delivering more of a sweet malty flavor, or a Bonlander that's going to give a little more mouthfeel and malt taste, or dark roasted malts that are more traditional in things like stouts, for example, that give you that burnt roasted character, or that you might use in something like an imperial stout or an imperial IPA. Hop varieties. There are a multitude of hop varieties that we can choose from, some that are less well known and some that are very dominant in our industry in terms of the preferred use by brewers. And the hops themselves can add mouthfeel, they add aroma, bitterness. There's obviously a complexity of taste, if you will, that the combination of barley malts and hops deliver. And then there's that one little secret weapon called yeast that we also can choose from, whether it's a top fermenting or bottom fermenting yeast, and the different types of aromatic and taste notes that different yeast bring at different fermentation conditions. So it's bringing that whole palette together in a way that takes these few simple ingredients, think of them as basic colors, if you will, and pulling them together to make over 100 different styles of beers. If there's one thing that certainly has infected me over 35 years in the brewing industry, but I know that as part of every brewer and every employee that we work with, is a real passion for great tasting beers. Whether they're the mainstream premium light beers that we brew, which are an important part of who we are, Miller Lite certainly being America's local beer, or some of the bigger beers that we've talked about. No matter what our role is or who we are in the brewery, we all embrace this idea that, God did intend for us to be happy, and therefore He gave us beer. So, cheers, Jamie.
Cheers.
Really appreciated your time today, and hope you've enjoyed this day.
Next, I visited the Sprecher Brewery. James Larson showed me around and took me through a little Sprecher history.
Well, Sprecher Brewing Company was founded by Randy Sprecher in 1985. Prior to 1985, Randy was stationed in Germany with the Army, which is where he fell in love with European-style ales and lagers, which is predominantly what we make here. So we went back to school, went to UC Davis, which is a premier brew school not only here in the United States, but around the world as well. Became a brewer. So now we're on the right track. So he's looking for a job high and low, finds one here in Milwaukee with Pabst Brewing Company, moves out here, goes to work, loving it, living the dream, making blue ribbon for everybody. Not sure if you know, but Pabst went under. So everybody got laid off, and he said, well, I don't want to stop living the dream. I want to make beer for the rest of my life. So that kind of brings us to 1985. We actually set up shop downtown in kind of like 3rd Ward, 5th Ward kind of area. I think it was Virginia, 1st and Virginia, kind of along the railroad tracks. And we were working there until we moved into this facility in 1994. From there, we've just been chugging along ever since, and living the dream here.
James then took me through the Sprecher brewing process.
This is kind of where you get started on making beer, these kind of 3 tanks right here. So basically what we'll do is from the mill, it's going to go into our mash tun, and we're going to add water to that, and that substance is going to be the mash, and you're going to heat that mash to certain temperatures throughout the mashing process, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to trick the grain into thinking it's growing, but really what it's doing is releasing sugars and carbohydrates into the liquid, which can be later used as food for the yeast. This is arguably, the most important part about the beer making process.
The yeast room must remain completely sterile, so I wasn't allowed inside.
So that's going to take about 2.5 hours. We'll stand over it, stir up all that mash, agitate all those sugars out. After that 2-hour period, we'll say, all right, cool, we got what we're looking for. We're going to then take that mash, we're going to transfer the entire mash slurry, the water, the malt, all into this lauter tun, which is right behind the mash tun. And the lauter tun is basically kind of like a filter. So we'll run our mash in through there, then we're going to kind of separate that liquid from the solid grain. That liquid's obviously called wort, but while we're draining that wort away, or while we're extracting that wort out, we're going to realize that some of those sugars and carbohydrates are going to cling back onto the grain and not want to leave with the entire batch. We're greedy brewers, we want all those sugars and carbohydrates. So we take sparge water, this tall tank right here, and we start rinsing the grains as we're draining that wort away. Sparge water is just specifically treated water for the style of beer we're making, just so we're not rinsing the grains with regular old Milwaukee tap water. Not that there's anything wrong with Milwaukee tap water. Basically what we'll do is we'll take out all the essential minerals and stuff that's in water, because it's not just water. There's minerals and all sorts of good stuff, some other things that come through the treatment plant. And so we'll take all that stuff out, and then we'll isolate the style of beer that we're making. So for instance, if you're making like a Czech style Pilsner, if you're going to make a traditional Czech style Pilsner, you're going to have to use the exact same water profile as the Czech Republic, because water is 1/4 of the process. Really, really, really important. Absolutely. So we'll actually change the water profile to match that of that specific region, or similar to that specific region that we're making, and then we'll use that as kind of the rinse water. So it's not affecting the batch at all. It's not changing the pH or any of the mineral content or anything like that in the water while we're making the beer.
After the yeast is added, it's off to the fermenter. They say the waiting is the hardest part. Finally, the beer will be ready to bottle or keg.
All right, so from the lager cellar, which we walked through, all the beer and soda gets transferred in this mural room right here called the filling room. The bottles, on the other hand, get their start down the hall and around the corner on our industrial bottle washer. They travel along the conveyor belt towards the ceiling to the close side of this room, where they get filled with water, blasted with CO2, and then drained, just to make sure there's nothing nasty lingering in those bottles. Enter the filling room, get filled and capped. Surprise, surprise. They come out on the far side, continue along this conveyor belt behind me to this first mess machinery right here, which is our labeling machine, which slaps a neck label, a body label, and stamps each bottle with a date. Those bottles then continue along to the case making machine, which shake all the bottles perfectly into case format, drop them down into a cardboard box, send them on up over this bridge to the other side of the hall where there's a palletizing machine, or a robotic arm that moves each individual case perfectly onto pallets on the seat behind you. We'll wrap it with plastic, and a guy with a forklift will pick it up and take it where it needs to go. So, that being said, it's a pretty automated system. We can run through 170 bottles of soda every single minute on this line, and 140 bottles of beer. The difference being because we flash pasteurize all of our beer, which does 2 things for us. Creates a nice uniform product, so any yeast lingering in the bottle, changing the final product can stop exactly where we want it, so every single bottle is going to be the exact same every single time. The other benefit is that it improves the shelf life, so it can make it farther distances. So, beer that's lasting about 6 months in the bottle before going bad can now last about 1.5 years. It was pretty good.
All right, so we're finally made it to the end.
Finally made it to the beer. I suppose no better time than now. Cheers.
Cheers to great beer. It's the fruits of our labors.
Absolutely. The best kind of fruits.
Sprecher makes over 32 styles of beer, including seasonal blends. James spoke about the growing popularity of craft breweries.
Well, I think the average individual today is looking for something more flavorful. I think we're seeing it not only in beer, but we're seeing it in food. We're seeing it in basically everything that we do. We want more out of what we're getting. We're realizing that, yes, we can buy some of this commodity brand beer, but we're going to get what we pay for. We're going to say pennies on the beer, but it's not going to taste good. It's going to be bad beer. We want flavor. We want something new. We want something interesting. And I think that along with a lot of other beer-centric, forward-thinking folks, they're trying to ignite the communities to get behind their local breweries, to get behind their kind of good beer that's being made, to try and push those big guys out of there, those conglomerates that are just in it for money or marketing power or prowess. And I think that it's kind of community-based stuff these days, so which is good. But I think it's down to us wanting more flavor. We want more out of our beer, and we're not willing to waste our time on boring light beer.
I wanted to learn a little more about home brewing, so I contacted my buddy Smokin' Joe Sinke, a home brewing enthusiast. Hi, Smokin' Joe.
Hello.
It's kind of a rainy day here in April, but it's perfect weather for making some beer.
Yes, it is.
So why don't you show me what you got going here?
All right, well, we got the collected and are now heating 2.5 gallons of water, which will be the base for our worts. These are just would be they're grains, barley. They're like malted and roasted and crushed. These are going to be kind of add extra flavor to it. We're going to steep it in the water, kind of like a tea bag. This is my buddy Butch Patterson here.
Hello, I'm a fellow beer baron. Brewing is best done with two people. Plus you have somebody to drink beer with while you do it.
And right now what we're doing is that, like I said before, we're steeping the grains, just making sure that the temperature, I got a little temperature gauge here, the temperature doesn't get over 170 degrees, because instead of steeping it, then you're cooking them. Alright, grains are now been steeped. So what I usually do is I raise it up and tie it off on the side so it can just kind of drip off while we're doing later stuff. Okay. This is the dry malt extract. Basically, like I talked about before, when you go all grain, you basically use from the grains itself. You mash it down and let the enzymes work and basically make this. Just kind of add it in there. And one thing you gotta worry about here is that you gotta keep stirring it, but it tends to boil up. Back in the olden days, like in the Middle Ages, man, woman, and child drank beer. They all drank beer because they didn't know about germs at the time. They knew if they drank the water, they got sick. But if they drank beer, they didn't get sick. They felt pretty good. But the reason why is that they had to boil it to make the beer, and that's killed the germs. Well, they didn't know at the time, but that's what they did. A good film to see is How Beer Saved the World. It's a documentary about basically how all the great achievements of humankind were influenced by beer. Yeah, was it the basic starting of civilization? The building of the pyramids, modern medicine.
At first we thought 5 gallons was a lot of beer, but it's really not.
Yeah.
Once we got a keg, it's much easier. You just fill a 5-gallon keg, you're done. We also use growlers. That's about the size of a half a pitcher. It reduces the bottling. The bottling is quite tedious. It's nice for travel if you're taking some samples, but for home use, we prefer the growlers and the kegging.
When the wort is ready, it's time to add the hops.
All right, now it's boiling away nicely there. Now all we do now is this recipe calls for just the boil it for an hour and then add the late additions later. So we'll come back to this in an hour and we'll finish it up then. All right, now it's been an hour. It's boiled. Now this is for this recipe is the late addition corn sugar. We use this to lighten the body so it's not heavy, but also still retain the same amount of alcohol. For in the beer, you use corn sugar, but for bottling, you could use either table sugar or corn sugar. And it's all kind of whichever you need there. Cool it down to 70 degrees or warm to the touch. You touch the side and it's warm, it's just warm, it's not hot. And then you can add the yeast. Like here, we made a yeast starter. So if you can see, I don't know if you can see on the bottom, this right here, this is the active yeast that it's settled. It's went through and munched on the sugar and kind of just, now it's kind of like in a little food coma on the bottom here. So after this is cooled to 70 degrees or cooler, warm, just warm to the touch, you just dump this in there, put it into your fermenter, put the airlock on, and then just wait till it ferments, and then you'll be able to bottle the beer then.
Smokin' Joe had piqued my interest in home brewing, so I headed to the Lakefront Brewery to check out a gathering of the Beer Barons of Milwaukee, a club for local home brewers.
Years ago, the Barons were just a glorified drinking club, but a few of us got together and decided that we should get into more education. So now we're promoting better beer by better brewing. And we also do a yearly, now it sounds like we're going to do a biannual beer judge certification program for new judges. To become a judge, it's not as simple as just drinking beer. There's a lot of history that you need to know. You need to know how to brew beer, not only as an extract brewer, but as a all-grain brewer.
These guys could get a little rowdy, but they knew a lot about making beer.
The great things that people do in experimenting is like growing your own hops. So what you do is you grow the hops like the farmers do, and then you dry the cones yourself, and then you can add them to your beer. Or what you can do is you can add the hops to your beer when it's wet, and it's called wet hopping. And so it gives it a little bit more of a kind of a grassy, earthy character to your beer, and it's a great way to experiment in the fall of the year. It's a great way to get together with a bunch of your friends, and it's another excuse to brew a batch of beer.
Through the last 12 years or so, I've been bringing different beers to this club, and it's grown from 100 members to 300 members. And they do the, education, they do the judging of, competition beers, and they're a great club.
Prior to last July, when it was signed into law again, we were, as homebrewers, were not able to transport our homebrew out of our home. We could not give it to our neighbor. We could not bring it to a competition. We could not mail it to a competition. Now that the legislation has passed that we can transport our product, we can do all of that.
A big part of the reason that homebrewing has become so popular is because all of these great flavors that you can get from something that you wouldn't expect. And so definitely the craft brew scene, and a lot of people are just interested in doing things on their own. A lot of people are starting their own small gardens and growing their own hops. So that's a great way to increase, kind of a do-it-yourself lifestyle. Homebrewing is above and beyond my favorite hobby. It's fantastic because I can choose exactly how I want a beer to turn out. If I want a beer as light as a Miller Lite or a genuine draft, but as dark as Guinness, I can make it happen. And if I want something that's got crazy intense flavors, like one of the beers that we tried tonight, the barley wine Chad, I can make that as well. And the thing that I like the most is that it's experimenting, it's being innovative, and just doing things that I want.
Water, hops, malted grains, and yeast. From these simple elements is an infinite variety of beers. A great deal of science is involved, to be sure, but also the passion of those whose quest it is for great beer. I'm Jamie Sodd, and thank you for joining us here on The Brew.